Maduro says Venezuela will send astronauts to moon in Chinese spaceship. Libya dam burst, flooding death toll soars to 11,300. Chinese online apps TEMU leaks user data with 900 complaints per year, US warns. Chinese defense minister under investigation by Beijing, US believes. It's all covered in today's Understand China. Maduro says Venezuela will send astronauts to moon in Chinese spaceship. During a state visit to Beijing, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro vowed to send the first Venezuelan man or woman to the moon in a Chinese spacecraft as part of a new strategic partnership between the two nations. As reported by the Washington Post, Maduro and Chinese President Xi Jinping, meeting in person for the first time in 5 years, agreed to boost cooperation in several areas, Maduro said, including oil, trade, finance, mining, and space exploration. Very soon, Venezuelan youth will come to prepare as astronauts, here in Chinese schools, Maduro said, as part of a new era of collaboration between China and Venezuela. After years of drifting away from Beijing, Maduro is strengthening ties with China as he seeks help reviving Venezuela's crumbling economy and oil industry. Venezuela is also in talks with the U.S. exploring the possibility of lifting some American sanctions on Venezuela's oil sector in exchange for Maduro's promise to hold free and fair presidential elections next year. Maduro's pledge to send citizens to the moon comes as Venezuelans continue to flee the country on foot. Political, economic and social crises have fueled an exodus that has surpassed 7 million. The country still struggles with frequent power outages, insufficient running water, political instability, and an inflation rate that reached 234% in 2022. Jeff Ramsey, a senior fellow with the Atlantic Council, said, Maduro is not able to feed his own people, much less get a Venezuelan on the moon. He added that the lunar aspirations are a little ridiculous, but Maduro is desperate to broadcast an image of himself as a successful statesman. China, which has worked for years to expand its influence in Latin America, has been an important lender to Venezuela since Hugo Chavez founded the socialist state. Venezuela is China's biggest borrower in Latin America with $60 billion in state loans. On September 13, Beijing announced that it was upgrading its relationship to an all-weather strategic partnership. More countries are entering a 21st-century space race. Japan launched a mission this month in an attempt to become the 5th nation to land on the moon, weeks after India successfully landed a robotic spacecraft near its south pole. The U.S. remains the only country to send men to the moon. The Soviet Union and China have landed unmanned probes. Venezuela recently became the first Latin American country to be invited to the International Lunar Research Station, a program led by China and Russia and focused on establishing a permanent base on the moon. Maduro has also expressed interest in joining BRICS, the economic grouping of Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa, which will add 6 nations to its ranks next year. Ramsey said the timing of the Beijing trip, amid ongoing talks with the United States, is likely an attempt by Maduro to show the Americans he has options. But I'm not sure he got what he wanted, Ramsey said. The reality is that Venezuela owes over $15 billion to China at the moment, and the Chinese are looking to recover their investment before they get any deeper. Venezuela is expected to hold presidential elections next year, but Maduro has not yet set a date for the vote. His government has banned the leading opposition candidates from running in the race. Libya dam burst, flooding death toll soars to 11,300. The Libyan Red Crescent said on September 14 the death toll in Libya's coastal city of Derna has soared to 11,300 as search efforts continue following a massive flood fed by the breaching of 2 dams in heavy rains. As reported by AP News, Daniel, an unusually strong Mediterranean storm, caused deadly flooding in communities across eastern Libya, but the worst hit was Derna. As the storm pounded the coast September 10 night, residents said they heard loud explosions when 2 dams outside the city collapsed. Floodwaters gushed down Wadi Derna, a valley that cuts through the city, crashing through buildings and washing people out to sea. A UN official said Thursday that most casualties could have been avoided. If there would have been a normal operating meteorological service, they could have issued the warnings, World Meteorological Organization head Petteri Talas told reporters in Geneva. The emergency management authorities would have been able to carry out the evacuation. The WMO said earlier this week that the National Meteorological Center issued warnings 72 hours before the flooding, notifying all governmental authorities by email and through media. Officials in eastern Libya warned the public about the coming storm, and on Saturday, they ordered residents to evacuate coastal areas, fearing a surge from the sea, but there was no warning about the dams collapsing. The reason for the Libya disaster has been intensively discussed. According to Al Jazeera, while many, particularly some of Libya's politicians, are painting what happened as purely the result of a natural disaster, experts say that corruption, poor maintenance of public infrastructure, and years of political infighting, with Libya divided between two rival administrations, have made the country unprepared to tackle an event like Storm Daniel. Deputy Mayor Ahmed Madraoud said the way the city was built put most of the population in the water's direct path, the dams had not been maintained for more than 2 decades, and the infrastructure was not built to withstand the effects of this week's floods. Claudia Gazzini, the International Crisis Group's senior analyst for Libya, said, the general state of turmoil also means a lot of bickering over the allocation of funds. For the past 3 years there has been no development budget, which is where funds for infrastructure should fall, and no allocation for long-term projects. Libya has seen more than a decade of conflict and is politically divided. An internationally recognized government sits in Tripoli in the west, but Derna is in an area controlled by a rival administration based in Benghazi. Gazzini added, and none of the two governments is legitimate enough to make big plans, something that curbs focus on infrastructures. This indicates that both the government of Libya's longtime dictator Muammar Gaddafi, and the administrations that came after he was overthrown in a revolution in 2011, had failed to ensure the upkeep of vital infrastructure. Last year, a paper from researchers at Omar al-Mukhtar University warned that the two dams needed urgent attention, pointing out that there was a high potential for flood risk, yet no action was taken. Cycle of violence. The devastation caused by the floods was the latest tragedy for Derna, a city of about 100,000 people, traditionally known as the country's cultural capital, before groups such as ISIS, took advantage of the lack of a functioning state to seize it in 2014, until they were driven out the following year. 3 years later renegade General Khalifa Haftar, who is seen as the primary authority in Libya's east, took control of Derna, which had remained the last pocket of territory in the east to reject his rule. After a brutal 2-year siege, the city was torn apart by intensive bombardments and ferocious ground fighting. The cycle of violence throughout the years has left its scars, with authorities not investing in any major rebuilding program. Hani Shinib, president of the National Council on U.S.-Libya Relations and a frequent visitor to the city, said, the only hospital that is functioning in Derna today is a rented villa that has 5 bedrooms. He added, this is not new, this is going on for 42 years, it has caused the alienation and political turmoil since the days of Gaddafi. Every minister of health and prime minister would drop by Derna, would make statements about supporting the city and then ignore it completely. The floods, Shinib said, were the straw that has broken the camel's back. The erosions in the dams in Derna are not new, they have been reported repeatedly, including in scientific journals from 2011 and moving on. He added, no official has paid attention to it. Costly corruption. Many are now pinning the blame on local authorities, who have been accused of being negligent in their planning for the storm. On September 9, a day before the storm arrived, the Derna Municipal Council posted a message on Facebook imposing a curfew while asking residents to evacuate only areas adjacent to the coast. On September 11, it called the situation catastrophic, pleading for urgent international aid. Speaking to Al Arabiya on September 13, Derna's mayor Abdulmanam Al-Gaithi rejected criticism of the authorities' actions, saying that they had undertaken all the precautions necessary and informed locals. But many disagree. Anas El-Gomathi, the founder and director of the Sadek Institute, said, the eastern authorities in Derna bear the responsibility for their judgment call. Their inaction despite the clear threat has cost many thousands of lives, when it could have cost cinder blocks and bags of cement. But the problem goes beyond the local administration, stemming from years of corruption and the dismantling of public infrastructure. He added, the neglect of Libya's critical infrastructure and its maintenance is a major factor in what led to the dams bursting, and the city being submerged. Corruption and financial mismanagement are the cause behind failing infrastructure that has plagued Libya for decades, but the successive regimes are culpable, and it is the Military Investment Authority that has cannibalized Libya's public infrastructure in the east, destroying it to be smuggled and sold for scrap metal. Looking at the tragedy in Libya, Apollo News compared the situation in this nation with that in China. It is because China has more than 87,000 dams, making it the country with the most dams in the world. Among those, Three Gorges Dam is known as the world's largest dam. Corruption within the Chinese government is also another popular issue. Chinese online apps TEMU leaks user data with 900 complaints per year, US warns. The U.S. based consumer protection company, Better Business Bureau, BBB, has warned that the Chinese online shopping app TEMU has leaked user data since its launch last summer. The number of complaints related to data leakage has been increasing. Exposed data include social media accounts and banking information. Other information collected from consumers contains the operating system of the phone or electronic devices such as laptops and flat panel computers, IP addresses, browsing data, and GPS locations. Cybersecurity professionals suspect the app could bypass phone security settings to spy on other apps or even change settings. TEMU, which specializes in ultra-low prices and free shipping, is also the so-called American version of Pinduoduo. BBB official Tom Johnson pointed out that if they infiltrate your cell phone and operating system, they can access other apps you're using, and even the user's contact information can be leaked. Therefore, consumers have to be very careful because their information is a gold mine, and once it falls into the wrong hands, it's vulnerable to identity theft. The shopping app has been downloaded more than 50 million times in the U.S., and many Chinese in particular, are TEMU users. TEMU, owned by China-based PDD Holding Incorporated, began operations in July 2022 and BBB has received nearly 900 complaints against the company so far. Chinese defense minister under investigation by Beijing, U.S. believes. As reported by the Financial Times, the U.S. government believes that Chinese Defense Minister Li Shangfu has been placed under investigation, in the latest sign of turmoil among elite members of Beijing's military and foreign policy establishment. 3 U.S. officials and 2 people briefed on the intelligence said the U.S. had concluded that Li, who has not been seen in public for more than 2 weeks, had been stripped of his responsibilities as defense minister. The move comes 2 months after China's President Xi Jinping removed the 2 top generals at the People's Liberation Army Rocket Force, which oversees China's rapidly expanding arsenal of long-range missiles and nuclear weapons. The investigation into Li also follows the disappearance of Qin Gang, who was ousted as Chinese foreign minister in July. People briefed on the intelligence did not say what had led the Biden administration to conclude that Li was being probed. Reuters on September 14 cited Vietnamese officials saying that Li abruptly cancelled a meeting last week because of a health condition. At one point in the run-up to the ousting of Qin, the Chinese Foreign Ministry explained his mysterious absence from official events as being health-related. The probe into Li raises questions about the effectiveness of the anti-corruption campaign that Xi, who serves as chair of China's Central Military Commission, had pursued against the Chinese armed forces. Dennis Wilder, a former top CIA expert on the PLA, said, "If the removal of the defense minister and the rocket force leaders was because of corruption, it indicates that Xi's vetting process for selecting top officials is deeply flawed and suggests corruption is commonplace within the system despite Xi's decade-long campaign against it." Wilder added that the Equipment Department, which was formerly called the General Armaments Department, had a long history of having the worst corruption inside the Chinese military. Bonnie Glaser, a China expert at the German Marshall Fund, said Li's removal could help U.S. China military relations by removing the obstacle that China insisted would prevent any meeting with Austin. Glaser added, "I don't think it calls into question Xi Jinping's control of the military, but it should be a reminder about how much corruption exists in the system." Don't forget to comment in the section below to share your opinions on today's topic with us. Make sure to like and subscribe to see more interesting topics from Understand China, and thank you for tuning in.